Assalamu alaikum. I'm so gassed to make this video, but before I do, my main TikTok, my business TikTok got banned permanently, so this is the new one. I think the Khawarij, the extremists, didn't like the fact that I was advocating against extremism. Nonetheless, I have made another one. Can't get rid of me. So today's topic is the hijab. I really wanted to dedicate a video on the hijab, especially for women, because I love my Muslims. I love you guys. I'm going to tell you guys my motive for making this video, what has pushed me and encouraged me to make this video. I will start off by saying that when I reverted to Islam, there wasn't really a rise in people converting. Islam wasn't trendy basically. But I did observe when Islam became trendy, even last year in 2024, Islam became trendy. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean that Islam became known to a lot more people and it became basically trending. And a lot more people began reverting. And I realized that whenever Islam trended and whenever people began reverting is when the extremists would come out of their shells, extremism would also begin trending. And with that comes a lot of reverts leaving Islam to go back to their religion because they're like, what the hell did I get myself into? And it's also a lot of reverts struggling with their hijab, with one and the other. Or there's really young reverts believing in extremism and then conforming to the ideology and then realizing later on that they wish they never done that because their perception of Islam is ruined. Hi, I'm one of those people. I am a product of that. So I've kind of shared my story in my other videos vaguely. I've seen it, I've lived it, and I've made this video because, and it's going to be a long video I hope, because it just touches me right here, in my heart. I've even seen sisters, so I used to go to a masjid and they were very dressed up with the niqab and everything. And I don't associate this with extremism that a lot of people do. And a lot of people who are extremists do cover up this way as well. So I don't blame other people for associating this with extremism when you have extremists literally dressing this way. I've had them who were very pious in front of everybody, and behind the scenes they were not. They were struggling, and it's because you cannot maintain a lifestyle as a Muslim that's too extreme nor too liberal, because Islam is balanced, because Allah has told us in the Quran not to go to extremism. I've seen a lot of sisters be discouraged from the niqab, from the hijab, and there's two results that can come from this. So when you have people slandering you for not wearing your hijab properly, there's two things that can happen. It's either you take off your hijab because you can't deal with it anymore, you keep associating this with man, or you end up covering yourself so much because you're under the impression that this is the right thing to do, but you don't know why you're doing it, because the reason why you've covered is because Ahmed over here told you to cover, but you do not understand why you have to cover. So there's like two things that can happen from this, and so I'm here to combat that with this video. I want to start off by saying how my journey was with the hijab and then my struggle with it, and then how I ended up combating all of those struggles, and I learned to love myself with this amazing khimar and jilbab and niqab, how I ended up loving it. Because I have seen a rise in sisters taking off the hijab on TikTok, and I've seen a rise of sisters of it's so sad. I have seen a rise in like 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds glamorizing going to the extremist groups. I know that they're going to regret that, because I know people went through the same thing as me and then we're all back here regretting that we've ever let that happen. But I guess it's also character development, you get me? Okay, so let's start off with my story. I was wearing just the hijab because that in the very beginning you don't have such an in-depth understanding of what the hijab actually is, and so a lot of us are under the impression it's just a headscarf, where it's actually not. And I should make a separate video on what the hijab actually is so that we can, you know, increase our knowledge in this. Also with my family it was very hard to wear the hijab in general, so like I'm not going to say just that. With time, I think it was like 6 months after, I began wearing the jilbab, because that's when my knowledge in the hijab began increasing. I was like, okay, so the Sharia legislated hijab is not actually a jersey hijab, it is a khimar, an abaya, or it's a jilbab. And then I was introduced to the half niqab. So at this time I really loved wearing what I was wearing, because I wore it as a jihad. Basically I was struggling in the way of Allah when I was doing it, and not because it wasn't like a spiritual struggle, it was more so a family struggle. So when I was prevented from wearing my Islamic attire, I was pushed to want it more, and I just loved the way I felt with it. I knew that with this I identified as a Muslim, not just in me but everyone knew now, and I liked that everyone knew I was Muslim. So it was like that connection with Allah that I had that was so beautiful, and that kept it on. And I think we need to like keep a tab on that. After a few months, I began wearing the niqab. Oh yeah, I read a book one time. I'm editing this video before I get hold of the book, because my book is back home. It was like this book on the hijab, which if you guys do follow my Instagram, I will probably put it in my story. It's such a good book and it convinced me of the niqab. Also there were like several lectures that are so many hours long that just go in depth about it, and I was personally convinced. I really believe that fard and wajib are two different things. And I'll tell you guys what, if I were to say the niqab is fard, I would be wrong. When I say the niqab is wajib, I am correct. And why do I say this? Because fard is something that is not disputable. Like your salah, everyone knows you have to pray 5 prayers. That's fard. That's not wajib. There's not a dispute among it. However, with the niqab, there is a dispute among it. Some scholars say you don't need to wear it. Some scholars say it's sunnah. Some scholars say the face is not awrah, because there's certain hadiths. The Prophet ﷺ said it, which said that the face and hands were not awrah, basically, to prove that it's not wajib. So there's clearly a difference of opinion there. Hence why I will never say it's fard, and if you follow the opinion it's sunnah, you don't have to wear it, that's fine. And that's why seeking knowledge is so important, because with time you begin to understand and begin to formulate your own opinions, basically, and you're more conscious of what you're convinced by, and it helps you navigate yourself through your journey. So I began wearing the niqab, and then lo and behold, guys, the extremists came. Around 1.5 years after that, and I began getting stuck into extremism. I found that when you're very hardcore in your religion, like very, very hardcore, nothing is a connection. Like, you don't feel connected with anything anymore. It's either you do, you don't, or else there comes this punishment. I found that I wore it with no actual reason. I just wore it because I know that the group I follow was wearing it, and if I don't, I'm gonna get punished, like that. And subhanallah, it showed also through my ahlak, like my behavior, my etiquette. It really showed, and I hated it. Like, when I think about it now, I hate myself when I think about it. Yeah, man, I was not understanding, and I was like, subhanallah, how ironic, knowing that I have lived a life of struggle with my parents, and I am not being understanding to other sisters who are possibly in the same situation as me. So what these extremists do is they have like zero mercy, guys. Zero mercy. It's either you listen to them or you don't. And this is what I've observed with the extremists. They take scripture, they manipulate it to fit their extremist narrative, because they like the position of dictator, right? They like to control everything, even if you were to correct them in something, there is no such thing. You cannot correct these people, they will argue with you back. So they present themselves as so righteous, but when they are wrong in something, they're going to finish you. So with time, and also because the struggle within my family began to increase, I also began to realize, like, there's no connection anymore. Like, in the beginning there was a connection, now I'm feeling there's no connection. Everything is do's and don'ts and rules, but I don't feel any connection with what I'm doing. Why am I doing this? Why am I doing that? A lot of these extremists, they will be under the impression that the disbelievers need to be killed. It doesn't matter who they are. SubhanAllah, I never thought of it like that extreme, but you'll find that a lot of them do think that way. When you are under the assumption that every disbeliever has to die, you're giving no room for people to convert. You're not giving, instead of you giving dawah, giving the opportunity for more people to convert and find the love of Islam, what you're doing instead is you're in the position of Stalin out here, and you're gonna kill people. That to me was the complete caca. I was just like, this is complete caca to me. How are you calling yourselves Muslims and you're erasing opportunities for other people to discover Islam? Like, get out my face. That was the first sign that I was like, you people are mad. Yeah, so it was like, I didn't feel any connection. Then I thought to myself, you guys are erasing every opportunity for people to find Islam. That didn't make any sense to me. Also, when Allah has legislated in the Quran the way to do your jihad, and you're not doing your jihad that way, okay, you're making up your own rules. Get out my face. A lot of them take the opinions of ulama as higher than what Allah has stated in the Quran. This is not talked about enough. A lot of these Khawarij, a lot of these extremists, they will take the words of their ulama as higher than what Allah has said in the Quran. You know why? Because they like that this specific ulama follows their extremist narrative. They like that they have subscribed to the same thing, and that's why. And anything other than that is incorrect, and I don't like that either. I hate thinking about it. It's just so cringe now. And the hijab became really hard for me. There's an incident that happened with me that made me really want to take it off, and I really struggled. I ended up taking my niqab off because I had associated this with man. I began being slandered by men, by women, on my hijab and my niqab. And this is another thing that these extremists do. They don't give you dawah, they don't give you nasiha, they don't give you advice. They slander you. They call you all sorts of names. I was, wallahi guys, I was called an apostate. I was like, are you serious? With what basis? They had no basis. My account is based on Islam. Like, so yeah, they call you a bunch of names, and guys, don't you know? When you're slandered, you have to do what they tell you to do. I'm joking. So yeah, they think with their slandering and with their calling names, people are just gonna follow them, which I hope Allah holds these people accountable. I am never forgetting what they've done to me. I only had support from my close friends, which I know they watch my videos. So if you're watching this video, I was like, why do I have to cover for you, is what my mind was. Why do I have to cover for you? Why do I have to do everything for you? How long did it take me? Let me think. 8 months. It took me 8 months to get to the point where I am now, when I just feel content with my hijab and I love what I wear and I love what I do. Now that I've said my story, so here I'm going to give you guys a talk as to how I managed to combat these emotions. How do we stop associating the hijab with man? Because for the longest time, I was under the impression I wear the hijab for a man. So I will start by saying that when Allah had legislated the verses of hijab, He sent those verses at a time that it was necessary. So during the times of the Jahiliyyah, the women were obviously not observing the hijab. They were not under the impression that they needed to. Meaning that when Allah had legislated the hijab, there was good reasoning behind it. And when Allah had legislated the hijab, do you see that Allah says anywhere in the Quran that you're doing it for a man? To protect us. It's always been to protect us. When Allah has told us to do anything, it's been for our protection. And I don't just refer to the hijab now, I'm referring to not drinking, to not doing zina. It's always been to protect us spiritually and from greater harm. So think about this. If Allah has told you, don't drink, right? Why shouldn't we drink? Let's look at the logical part of it. Because, okay, maybe there can be an addiction, which can probably lead to worse things. Maybe death, maybe liver disease. So Allah has always protected us from greater things, from greater harm. Imagine with these small things, that when we think about why Allah has prohibited us, we can understand why He's prohibited us with it. So with such a big thing as hijab, imagine the greater reasoning for it. So that's the first thing that helped me stop associating my hijab with a man, is that when Allah had told me to observe my hijab, it was because Allah loved me enough to protect me from greater harm. I love this so much. I've always, since making that connection, I've always thought as hijab as something beautiful, that Allah loves me enough to protect me. That's the way I think of it. When you have a child and you tell them to put a coat on, it's to protect them from what could be, from greater harm, from the cold, because with the cold, and if you're exposed to the cold, there can come so many illnesses from it, which that child may not understand until they are faced with those problems, or until they are old enough to understand. It's because you want them to be protected from greater harm. It's an act of love, and I feel like that child. I have understood now why I wear the hijab, and also I feel like the hijab elevates my honor. And I've reached the point of hijab, of this thinking that hijab elevates my honor, because every great woman, every great Islamic woman, such as the Prophet's wives, they were all observing the hijab. All of these great women that were elevated in status by Allah and that were loved by Allah were all observing the hijab. They all had that in common. And I know as women, we want to show off our beauty. Now, Allah has never promised that after we became true believers that we would live an easy life, because our life is a test. And we were also created to sin, with the purpose also to return back to Allah. Allah has never promised that hijab would be easy. So basically, here's the thing. When Allah has legislated the hijab, Allah has knowledge that we do not have knowledge of. And that's another reason why hijab is considered an act of jihad, an act of struggle towards Allah that you will gain rewards for. Because Allah knew that this would be such a hard thing for women to observe. There was great reasoning behind it. And so we also get rewarded for it. So I see my hijab as just something so beautiful, and I don't associate it with man. That's actually just how I combated negative emotions of hijab. You know, Allah has sent down a chapter for us women. Allah loves us a lot, and it's so sad that a lot of men and a lot of women, they don't acknowledge that, and it makes it, and oh, I've had so many sisters DM me about this. They felt like inferior to men, and we don't realize how much Allah loves us because it's not talked about enough. Assalamu alaikum.